Hey there, my name is Sam Van Fleet and I train horses. Oftentimes when we look at training horses, we're looking at specific exercises of what to do or kind of getting an idea or maybe getting help from someone on what specifically to do with our horses, but we don't really look at the basics and dive in a little bit deeper. What I'm talking about are the 4 quadrants of training. We often hear about negative and positive reinforcement, but there's also negative and positive punishment. Now the words are kind of strong, so I'm going to break it down a little bit more, and I'll put a chart up on the screen for you guys to help understand as well. When we think of negative and positive, we're thinking of sad and happy. We want to think of it in more mathematical terms. So positive, adding something, and negative, taking something away. There's a lot of trainers that use negative reinforcement. I use a lot of negative reinforcement, and that is, you commonly hear pressure and release. It can be other forms too, but it is taking something away. And then we hear reinforcement and punishment. You probably hear reinforcement more than punishment. Reinforcement is going to be encouraging a behavior you want from the horse, and punishment is discouraging a behavior. So positive reinforcement, adding something to encourage a behavior. Negative reinforcement, taking something away to encourage a behavior. Negative punishment, taking something away to discourage a behavior. Positive punishment, adding something to discourage a behavior. And I'll give you guys an example of these in a moment. Something that's pretty cool that associates really with positive reinforcement is clicker training or mark training. So clicker training marks the exact moment that you want to reward with that horse. So say my horse is doing some sort of a trick or something, or he's taking a correct step with his hind legs. Right when he is crossed over or making that exact correct movement, I'm then going to either say a word that I don't say often, so I wouldn't say like good boy or good girl, I might say yes. Or I'm gonna make a cluck noise. My noise, kind of hollow. It's not quite the same as the energy noises that we use, like it's more hollow noise. So that is the cluck that I use to kind of associate with my clicker training. The really cool thing about that is you're marking the exact moment you want to reward. It helps make that connection with your horse. You'll hear about different quadrants getting combined. It's really beneficial for the horse to have them combined, so not only like crossing over negative reinforcement but positive reinforcement, but sometimes the punishments. I will say if you are using positive reinforcement and giving food to the horse, because that would be adding to reinforce a behavior, you want to make sure you're doing so correctly. So treat receiving position is really important. You want that horse to turn their head away to deliver the treat, or even if they're muggy already, have a bucket on the ground to toss it into. There's a lot of different ways to work on your positive reinforcement regarding food. I don't have any videos out on that yet. Hopefully I will in the future, but I know there are already some fantastic ones on YouTube that help you out with positive reinforcement and how to correctly deliver that food to the horse, because mugging is a real problem, and when you start adding food in, you can get a horse that tries more and is more engaged, but you also may have other problems come out because they get a little too excited and start to kind of anticipate things. So before you get really dove into positive reinforcement with food, you might want to consider watching some of those and really working on that with your horse. And it won't just take one session. You know, it could take weeks or months to get a horse that is politely taking that food and understanding the correlation with the cluck for clicker training. It's something that these quadrants don't touch on, but I like to talk about a lot, is acknowledgement and acknowledging your horse's tries. Oftentimes you'll find really sensitive horses or really dull horses to be horses that don't get acknowledged yet enough for when they try, and that's why they react the way they do. They're used to being ignored, and then they kind of take that and go either way. So acknowledgement is another thing, kind of on the side, another part of training, but that's also with humans too. It's not just a horse thing. Keep in mind that when I give examples for all of these quadrants, every single interaction that you have with a horse kind of falls under one of these categories. We're going to go ahead and start with positive reinforcement. So positive reinforcement, adding something to encourage a horse's behavior. You are giving something that they value to make an action, a maneuver more desirable. A few examples of using positive reinforcement would be scratching your horse or giving a treat. Okay, adding something that they really enjoy, something of value to them. Now, a couple different examples that I'm going to talk about You would give your horse a treat when they do a trick correctly or they move their body correctly. It can be something as simple as moving their hip over, or a fun trick like the smile or the Spanish walk. I use it in conjunction with clicker training. You are giving a treat to reward that behavior and get it to happen more often. Another example would be if your horse bumps into you or nudges you and then you pet them and are, I don't know, consoling or rewarding them. That is adding something to encourage a behavior. They are getting a positive response. Your horse could be pulling you to the gate under saddle, or in hand they could be pulling you towards grass or towards food, and you let them go over there. There's no repercussion, you're not adding any energy, you are simply letting them take you over there and they're getting the food as that reward. So they're learning to pull. Your horse could be making faces at another horse in the barn or a horse riding by or walking by, and you pet them to console them. So it could be either nasty faces or worried faces. Either way, the petting is consoling to them. So whether you're encouraging the unhappy faces or you're helping your horse quiet down if they're worried, that is adding something positive to encourage the behavior your horse is displaying. You could also be telling your horse in a verbal tone that they understand that they are good. So if my horse does something right and I say yes, or I say good boy, and I go to petting them, or it's just the verbal cue in general, that is a slight form of positive reinforcement. Now when we look at negative reinforcement, here's the catch. Pressure is being added, but then when they do the desired behavior, we are taking it away. So negative reinforcement, taking something away to reward that behavior. So they're learning from the release of pressure, not it coming on. So the pressure is added, the reaction happens, the pressure is released. With negative reinforcement, once the pressure is added to start it, you cannot remove that pressure until you get the desired behavior. So that means you have to keep adding the pressure, either holding it steady or increasing it, it depends on the situation, until they give that desired reaction, and then immediately when they give that reaction, you have to do release. So as soon as my horse crosses his front legs, I immediately need to relax my energy, take that pressure off, or maybe if he's yielding his hindquarters and he does that really soft, immediately I need to take that pressure off and relax, and he's learning that the pressure goes away when he does that behavior. Another example of this is asking your horse to back up. I always recommend asking with a cue that is a little bit lighter, less pressure. However, it still is a slight lean towards the horse for them to back up. So you ask with a cue, and then when they don't provide that, you add pressure to get the horse to back up, whether it be tapping the chest or using the halter for them to back up. As soon as they back up, you release. Okay, so they're learning that here's my starting cue, leaning forward, and if that behavior isn't given, then I'm going to increase to adding more of a physical pressure, whether it be the halter or tapping of the chest. As soon as that horse backs up, I release. So they learn, if they don't want that pressure on their chest or the halter, to back up. Okay, and then the pressure comes off. Now let's look at the punishment categories really quick. Positive punishment is, again, adding something to discourage a behavior. So something is added that the horse doesn't like to reduce the likelihood that the behavior will occur again. There's many ways to use positive punishment. Not all ways are necessarily good ways, but again, we may unknowingly be doing some of these. So we may be yelling at a horse for a bad behavior, getting our energy up there, getting big and loud with our voice, and yelling at them to discourage a behavior that we don't want them to do. Pulling on the lead rope when they are diving to go eat grass, we are adding something they don't want. We're adding pressure to discourage a behavior. Making a horse back up after they've done something you don't like. So if you're trotting in hand and you halt and that horse bumps into you or kind of gets in your space and I don't want that, I'm going to ask him to back up and then release. I'm adding something to discourage a behavior. I'm discouraging him getting into my bubble, therefore adding positive punishment. We also call it a correction, but to get more specific with it, it is positive punishment. We are adding something to discourage that behavior. Adding pressure or the backup to discourage the horse bumping into my space. Another example is adding energy through our body language or a stick to discourage a behavior that a horse is presenting, such as pawing, right? Pawing, or maybe moving their hip around as they're tied. Just adding some sort of energy to discourage that behavior. And our last quadrant is negative punishment, taking something away that the horse likes to discourage a behavior. we are decreasing the likelihood of that behavior. You could be petting your horse and they nudge you or they go to nip you, so then you stop petting them, you walk away. We also consider this like ignoring, but this is also negative punishment. I'm taking away something the horse likes, me petting him, scratching him, and moving away when he does something I don't want him to do. I'm discouraging that behavior. I'm taking away what he likes, the scratches, to discourage what he's doing. A horse could be pawing at feed time, so you take the food away to discourage that behavior. Your horse also could be begging for a treat. You ask them to do a trick and they ignore it and do nothing in return, so you walk away without giving them that treat, right? You're taking something away that they want or they like to discourage a behavior. I don't want my horse to beg. I don't want him to ignore my cues for a trick, so I'm gonna just take it away. Okay, he gets no reward for doing those things. Operant conditioning is about consequences that affect future behaviors. So that's really important to remember when you're doing anything within these 4 quadrants, that no matter what you're doing with your horse, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, you are encouraging or discouraging behaviors from your horse. If this one time you let them pull their head down and eat grass, the next few times when you let them do that and pull them up, they might not understand why all of a sudden they're being punished for it. They got to do it before, they got grass as the reward. They were able to kind of determine where their head was going to pull you towards the food, and now they're being punished for it. But that behavior is strong in them now because they were previously being rewarded by being allowed to go and pull you to the grass and eat it. The 4 quadrants is something that I started talking about in clinics last year, and I don't think it's talked about often enough. I actually haven't found many horse videos that talk about the 4 quadrants of training and really dive into those areas. Because again, they're all kind of mixed up. You can use, positive reinforcement with negative punishment, or negative reinforcement with positive punishment, or just a little bit of one or the other. But to some degree, they kind of all mix together. And I think it's important to know what we are rewarding our horses for, what we're discouraging them for. Sometimes when we're doing something, we might not even recognize, exactly what we're doing. And I think it's good to have an understanding on a deeper level, whether we're reinforcing or discourage something, and what positive and negative actually mean, because it's not happy and bad, right? It's not good and bad, rather. It's more adding something to the horse, taking something away. That's why pressure and release falls underneath negative reinforcement, and then positive reinforcement falls under clicker training, giving a cookie, giving scratches. You're adding something to the horse, not positive in the way that it's happy. Thank you guys for joining me on this video today, talking about the 4 quadrants, and hopefully this helps you understand training a little bit more and how we are working with our horses and encouraging and discouraging behaviors.